Ah, yes, the Jubilee debates. Jubilee debates. We have this video of Dean Withers, a young liberal man, debating Ben Shapiro, in which, guys, I got to tell you, there are a lot of people on the liberal side of things, the left side of things, that try to use words for which they can sound smart because they think they talk all good and stuff. But all that really matters in communications is whether or not you can convey a particular idea that someone else can understand. So if you say, I believe a thing, but you cannot describe it or break it down in a way that a layman could understand, you've got nothing. Your idea stops with you. It doesn't mean you're wrong. In this instance, of course, this young man is completely wrong. And in his debate with Ben Shapiro tries to play a logical game with people who are illogical. There's actually a couple of clips that I'll talk about another one in a second, where Ben doesn't even actually get to debate a trans man, but that one's going viral, and we'll talk about that one. And I'm talking about tactics and liberal ideology. But in this regard, I find it particularly fascinating. And the first thing I will say is this is a perfect example of, if you ever look at leftist academia, or a really great example is from back in the day, feminist frequency. Everybody remembers Anita Sarkeesian. And what they do, these liberals, when they're trying to convey an idea and sound like they're right, instead of making an argument that is sound, they try and make it as complicated as possible. Hence the meme about left memes, where it's a big block of a wall of text. And you're like, I ain't reading that, but I'm happy for you, or sorry that happened to you, or whatever. Let me play this clip. And I will break this down, but also I will demolish the argument of this here man who I will call a fascist. I'm kidding, by the way, but I will say this too. Dean, we had him booked to come on the Culture Ward, have a sit-down conversation for 2 hours. Dude could not handle it. Sorry, I mean, that's the reality. I'm not gonna pull my punches. I'm not playing stupid games. Dean Withers was booked to come on the show for a sit-down conversation, and it was his call, whatever he wanted to talk about. You can say whatever you want to me. You can bring a computer. I will pull up anything you want me to pull up. And at the last minute, the week of, he cancels. Sorry, actually, I'm not going to be able to make it. And I'll tell you why. In the Jubilee setting, when you look at this video, and again, I'll pull it up for another segment, but it's a trans man who flips the chair around and sits with Ben and just basically rants nonsensically for 5 minutes or something like this. And Ben doesn't even say anything. See, this is the context in which liberals feel comfortable when they have a favorable moderator who is going to give them the benefit. Hence, Kamala Harris, she didn't want to go on Fox News. When Dean is given an opportunity to come and sit down in this room, me and him, just nobody else, he says no. Okay. Well, shout out to Sam Cedar at the very least, because Sam Cedar will be on this Friday, just me and him, and we'll be talking about whatever he wants to talk about. Of course, to be fair, I think Sam is more of a WWE kind of guy, and he's not really trying to argue ideas, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe it'll actually be a great conversation. I actually expect Sam to go for low blow emotional outrage because I don't think highly of him, but he's invited nonetheless, and he accepted, and I do respect it. So Sam, thank you. I really do respect that you're willing to come out here and sit down for 2 hours, and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. Let me play the clip.
You think that Trump should have won 2016?
Stop. I think the answer is yes, and we can break this down in any way we want. He says, do you think Trump should have won 2016? Trump should have won because he won the Electoral College. Yes. He should have won because personally, I think he's a better candidate. I did not vote for him, but I agree with Ben in this regard. So any way you want to cut and frame should. Here's we'll play more.
I'll wrap it in. It's conceptually relevant. I'll demonstrate the relevance.
Okay, sounds good. By what measure? Do I think he did win, or do I think he should have won?
Do you think he should have won?
I mean, yes, I'm happy that he won. If the question is, am I happy that he won? I'm happy that he won.
Okay. Well, I'd say that Trump won 2016 because...
By the way, I did not vote for either candidate in 2016. That's a decision made in retrospect.
Awesome. So I think that Trump won 2016 because of a modality of DEI.
Let's stop. What do you mean a modality of DEI? And why did you say it like that? Modality, of course, is... you guys know in philosophy, it's a function of a thing and how it's done. I don't think you need to say because of a modality of DEI. I think it's needlessly verbose. You could say a component of. You can say Trump won because of a function included in DEI. But I'm going to rip this one to shreds because this kid is basically the argument he's trying to make for DEI is basically saying that if an ideology contains anything that is good and we can compare it to anything else that is good, that is a defense of the ideology, which is absurd.
Essentially, what I'd say is the Electoral College, right, strives for inclusion of smaller states with lower populations by overrepresenting them in the overall vote.
Wrong. My guy, there's history and there's everything you got to read about history. You got to read about modern politics before you can get into this. First of all, diversity, equity, and inclusion is not an ideology by which we are trying to get smaller populations represented in the larger population. That is functionally incorrect based on the writings of the predecessors, the creators of the ideology, which ultimately becomes diversity, equity, and inclusion. Notably, if you go back to Kimberly Crenshaw, you can look at the writings from the book Critical Race Theory, for which many of these ideas begin to emerge. This is not a component of it. Specifically, in Kimberly Crenshaw's Critical Race Theory book, the outline in the beginning is specifically that Karl Marx did not understand race relations in the United States. Hence, they needed something else. Critical theory, of course, is the class-based system that Karl Marx theorized, or whatever you want to call it, conceptualized, where he said that there is a wealthy oppressor class and an impoverished oppressed class. Kimberly Crenshaw said that doesn't take into consideration race relations, where you can still be a middle-class or well-off black person facing segregation in a larger population. That is a core of DEI that has nothing to do with the Electoral College, but let's continue.
Like, you could correct me if I'm wrong, or the SAN fact checkers can. I'm pretty sure that over the last 25 to 30 years, Republicans have won the presidency given the Electoral College, not given the overall popular vote. So if you're against DEI, if you don't want inclusion on the basis of race, inclusion on the basis of gender, or even what you're saying earlier, we could even say inclusion on the basis of class, why do you want inclusion on the basis of population, rural areas, states, etc.?
We should actually use a better example. Why don't you just ask if I believe in the U.S. Senate? Right,
the U.S. Senate, this would also apply to the U.S. Senate.
Right, okay, so let's use the U.S. Senate because the U.S. Senate is actually even more unrepresentative of the general population than the Electoral College, which is at least a rough approximation.
It'd just be funnier to hear you say that you shouldn't have voted for Trump in 2016, but we could talk about the Senate as well.
That's a different subject, but yeah. I'm very happy that he won, even though I didn't vote for him. I mean, we can talk about Trump later. Yeah. We've already done a bit. Well, I'm sure we'll do more. As far as the idea that every elected body has to be elected based on population as opposed to based on the area of geographic distribution or the states that actually pre-existed the federal government. Okay, the way that the Constitution of the United States was created was as a contract between sovereign states, which is one of the reasons why, for example, you have a United States Senate as opposed to just a House of Representatives.
Pause. I'd love to have a conversation with Ben. I don't think Ben and I would ever actually debate the issue, but I believe I'm not a fan of his response here. No disrespect. I just think he's not actually getting to the concepts of DEI. And so he does go on to say that we have this representation system because it was a contract between sovereign states before the formation of the United States. I'm going to stop right there. I don't believe that is a good reason to have an electoral college or a Senate. I actually believe there is a functional issue today that requires a Senate and an electoral college, regardless of whether or not you believe in DEI or the Constitution or any of those things. Let Ben finish, however.
So is that a form of DEI? That seems like a stretch to me. What? The kind of DEI that I'm talking about specifically would be separating human beings based on inherent characteristics, like, for example, race, as opposed to suggesting that the United States Senate, which is obviously unrepresentative of the general population in many ways,
seemingly my point is
somehow bad. That's a check and balance, right?
Well, seemingly my point is that this...
Seemingly your point is? That's called the wasted word.
This is another modality of DEI.
No, it is not. That's completely incorrect. Please read the literature.
I've no problem with you explaining to me, right, why the Senate or the Electoral College would be given the U.S. Constitution and some contractual agreement that they had between the sovereign states. That's fine. But what I'd say is that your claim here would just imply that the Constitution upholds DEI within our electoral processes.
If your claim is
do you think that the Constitution upholds DEI in the sense of including smaller states?
Diversity, equity, inclusion. This is particularly identity-based politics. This is called identitarianism. Diversity, of course, representing not different ideas, but in practice, or praxis, as the left likes to call it, it is segregating based on race. For example, if you take a look at Harvard, they set different standards through affirmative action, or I don't know if they called it officially affirmative action, but you take a look at Asians needed higher SAT scores to get in than white people, and the lowest SAT scores for admittance were black people, then Latinos. White people were considered a baseline, which makes literally no sense. So this meant if you're Asian, and you say you're Asian, you have to be better than everyone else. Why? Simply because you look like someone else. Now, that is not a basis for a form of government. Thank you and have a nice day. That is DEI. That is how we see it implemented everywhere. Equity. Equity is often described very simply when they say, imagine there are three people looking at a baseball game, but everyone gets equally one crate to stand on. The tall man didn't need it. The average guy can see the game, but the short guy can't see the game with only one crate. Equity is often proposed as a way that, it makes a lot of sense. But actually, it's not really fair. equity is a manipulation because you cannot quantify whether or not someone can see something based on their race. That is not a determinant factor in success. This is what I can't stand about these racists. It's probably why these people don't want to actually sit down here, but shout out again to Sam Cedar, who will. The idea that you can look at three people and see an Asian guy, a white guy, and a black guy and know immediately who's the highest income earner and who's the smartest guy is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Now, when you're looking at population level scaling, you can certainly say we tend to see among Asians higher incomes. We tend to see among black families lower incomes. But that does not give you recourse at the individual level to then say, I can look at a black man and just know he makes less money. You're going to go walk up to Will Smith and you're going to be like, Will Smith is poor. No, that makes literally no sense. So why would we have a function of government or any kind of DEI that bases things off of race, unless you, as a liberal or leftist, are implying that when you look at a person, you can determine who they are, what they believe, and how much money they make based on their race? Or how about this, their gender, or their height, or any of these characteristics which make literally no sense. We understand population level patterns. And statistics. We get that. It is fair to say that on average, Asian males make more money than white males, than black males, than Latino males. But that says nothing to the individual. So if a black man came to me and said, here's what I'm good at, here's what I'd like to do for a job, I don't care if he's black. It is an absurdity to say, I'm going to hire someone for a job. I need someone who can, build computers. And then I'm like, but I'm going to make sure they're black. Why? Why say to someone they deserve or do not deserve something based on their race? That is an absurdity. And no, there's no modality of DEI in the U.S. Senate or in the U.S. Electoral College. Let me play a little bit more, and then I'm going to break down exactly why we actually need the Electoral College and the Senate today in a way that y'all could understand, and some of you probably already do, that doesn't go anywhere near the absurdity of these arguments, nor do I need to mention anything about a contract. Contracts are not good reasons for ideologies. So we agreed to it 200 years. No, let's play more. Wrap this up. We got 5 seconds.
Less representative populations.
That is a true stretch of the meaning of DEI.
So Ben is correct. It's certainly a true stretch, but I would just say it's an outright manipulation in no way. How about this, good sir, Dean Withers? You make the argument that the Electoral College is a modality of DEI, as if to imply that Ben should respect a component of DEI, or in and of itself, you are making a defense of DEI. This is the argument by which Dean is trying to enter in an acceptance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. His argument, of course, is that DEI's intention is to allow minority representation in governance and in social life. Of course, that is not what DEI does. Its intentions are irrelevant. To then claim, and I'm going to stretch a little bit too. I believe a reasonable conclusion that can be drawn from listening to Dean Withers is that he is saying, do you agree that there is at least one good thing about DEI? I'm going to play the game, Dean. Yes, thank you. Have a nice day. Next question. The idea that you could certainly say that here's an idea that functions within this other ideology. Don't you think it's good? Well, who cares if DEI has some things that are good and sometimes? If its overall ideology is bad, it's a bad ideology. But how about I fire it back in your direction, good sir Dean Withers. So you believe that the Electoral College and Trump's victory in 2016 is a modality of DEI. I just think it's the stupidest way to phrase it, but sure. Again, the implication being that there's a defensible aspect of DEI. Sir, the obvious response is, do you think it's good that trains are on schedule? I certainly think it's fair to say that trains running on schedule has been important for the workforce, for deliveries. It's allowed economic expansion. Wouldn't you agree that a modality of Mussolini's fascism exists in our scheduling systems? That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. You're making no real argument, okay? You're not going to simply come out and be like, hey, but the fascists made the trains run on time. That's always been the joke, the point, that it was garbage, that their ideas were garbage, but sometimes garbage people do good things. You know, a broken clock is right twice a day. It does not mean we should invest $1 billion in installing these clocks in every school because they're right twice a day. You need a clock that works. But let me give you my final thoughts on this one, my friends, and I'll break down exactly why outside of contractual agreements. And so again, no disrespect to Ben. There's probably a longer bit to this conversation I did not see. And I know Ben could have a longer conversation where there were someone actually trying to have a honest conversation with him. You know, I've told this story a million times. Tulare County, California, where I went during the drought, which is the perfect real world contemporary example of a need for a Senate and an electoral college. I don't care about contracts pre-existing. I believe that even to this day, internally, the creation of non-population representative governance is probably still a good thing. Tulare County, along with most of California, was suffering a drought. And actually, this comes up in Donald Trump was talking about this. It was really incredible in the Trump-Rogan podcast. There's a drought. I go to these farms in Tulare County, and I see these canals full of water. And I say to these farmers, why are you drilling for water thousands of feet and pulling it out of the ground, which is bad for the city? It's sinking the ground, and that groundwater may not ever come back. Why are you pulling out groundwater when you have this canal? And they said, the populations of San Diego, LA, they outvoted us. They voted that the water coming from the mountains and the streams and the canals has to go to the cities because there's more of them. So hold on there a minute. This is not about race. This is about the function of a state. The farms generate the revenue for the state largely, and they provide food for a lot of the world. The reason California is one of our largest economies is not because of Hollywood, it's because of farming. And these farm communities had no water. Worse still, the farm laborers had small wells that went down 30 feet. And when the farmers started drilling for water because they had no other way to get water, it dried up the smaller wells. And these families then relied on non-potable water deliveries from the state and charity. So when I go to some farmer's house, a farm laborer, and he goes, I can't turn my sink on. I'm like, well, why not? There's water in canals running all over the place here. The water comes here first. They said, they voted to take it from us. They voted to take your water? Yeah. Well, why would we ever tolerate someone voting to take what we need to live? That makes no sense. And so in these conversations I had with these farmers, it was quite enlightening. They said, well, look, you got 13 million people living in LA. You got 300,000 in Tulare County. So when Tulare County has groundwater in these canals, how are we going to win an election against 13 million people? They don't live here. Yeah. It's kind of wild, don't you think? So we can put it a couple different ways. The argument that they make is, look, there's way more people who need this water than farms. It's triage effectively. The population needs the water before the farms get the water. And I'm like, that's one way to put it. But it doesn't matter because it's all about voting. It's all about, are there more people to say we deserve something or you don't? Now, I don't think it's fair to say that the farm laborers in Tulare County, of which there are tens of thousands or more, because there's 300,000 living there, should not have water. We should, if you want to make the argument about it's about triage, then we say the first people to get water are it's the people of Tulare and these laborers, then the denser population centers, then the farms. Now, of course, you may be saying, but Tim, but the farms, they can't eat. Oh, I get it. But water comes first. That's not what they're doing. Now, let's talk about why the Electoral College in the Senate is important. Imagine that counties within the state of California had equal representation based on their region, not based on their population, as well as population votes. This would never have happened. Here's what happens. So you have, let's say there's state reps, and then there's representative governance, where each county gets a dedicated number of votes. Still, it's imperfect. And of course, the states do have senators and representatives. Don't get me wrong. But imagine a scenario where California wanted, and this is actually, I'll give you a real world scenario. I worked for an environmentalist organization in Illinois, and they were fighting lawsuits against the more barren states. Arizona, I believe, was the state, arguing that they should have access to the fresh water of the Great Lakes. They should be able to pump and redistribute this water to their states when they need it. And the Great Lakes state said, no way. Now, the argument was we are all part of these United States. It is a federal government, not the states have no right to block us. Fortunately, as was described to me, Ontario is a part of the Great Lakes Coalition. And because of international treaties pertaining to the barriers of the Great Lakes or the bodies of the Great Lakes, they could not just take it because the United States didn't have authority over Canada. That would be an international incident. I'll put it simply. The purpose of the Electoral College and the Senate is to make sure that smaller states, regardless of contractual agreement, do not have their resources taken from them by larger states. You would end up with a collapse of governance. For example, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, the original name of the state, it was plantations. They were growing things. They were farms. Originally, Rhode Island references literal island, and then on the main body, there were farms. Imagine if New York said, hey, we're going to put it to a vote. Can we take all of the food from Rhode Island? And they said, well, majority rules. And then they did. What would happen? By all means, you can make the argument you want democracy. Sure. Well, the people of Rhode Island would leave. And then there would be no food and no farms. Well, we want the farms to continue, so we're going to balance the equation. We're going to make sure that based on labor and resources, that there is going to be not necessarily a majority rule system, but at least a counterbalance so that a republic can exist. It has nothing to do, in my opinion, certainly there's a component of, yes, the states were sovereign. They entered into a contract. The contract stands to this day, and we respect it. But look at Michigan. When they start moving the auto industry out of Michigan to China and Mexico, people flee the state. The fleeing of the state results in an increase in costs of water, which results in Flint being like, we can no longer afford expensive water, so we're flipping the switch and we're going to use the Flint River. And then everybody gets sick. The high acidity results in erosion in the pipes, but kids are getting lead poisoning. There's Legionnaire's disease. That's what happens when you get a collapse of a state. Now imagine if the federal government would not allow, or I should say, it's not perfect in every instance. This is certainly an instance where we do have an electoral college and a Senate-based system, but you still see these things because the companies can make that choice. Imagine you have two states, regardless of the nuances of the debate, we'll simplify it. And one state says, we have 10 times the population of our neighbor. I hereby vote to take their stuff. What happens? The people who live in that state who are free citizens get up and leave and take their stuff with them. And now you've got a barren state and a populous state. That makes literally no sense. That is not a modality of DEI. It's a function of efficient governance. A true functioning government, such as we have, and this is a brilliant form of government, requires sometimes there to be weight in the favor of the minority. That is not minorities. That is a smaller population in a different area if it can protect resources. Granted, it can still be overcome by a large vote. But what we see now with the Senate and and Congress, the Senate, you could have a bill that says we want to take all these things away from these states. New York, California, and Illinois say we want to take from you. And they lose. The red states say no, we won't allow it because we each get 2 senators. So the representatives can pass the bill and the Senate can kill the bill. And you know what? That makes it very difficult and requires a strong degree of unanimity, or at least a plurality or majority of states and peoples to actually move forward. It's basically like saying you need a supermajority. That is the function of why we have an electoral college and a Senate. And I can get into greater detail on all of these things, but it is why back in the day they entered into the contract in the first place. And so there you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, it'd be great if good Sir Dean Withers was actually willing to sit down and have a conversation, but I got to be honest. Dean, you're always invited to come on. It's unfortunate that you bailed at the last minute. I can understand that it may be difficult for you to have a long-form 2-hour, no-holds-barred discussion on ideas for which you are not particularly well-versed. Sam Cedars willing to do it. Vosh is willing to do it. Lance from the Surfs is willing to do it. I give them all the respect in the world for having done it. I'm looking forward to my conversation with Sam. I think it'll be really fun. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up later today. Smash the like button, share the show with everyone you know, and we will see you all then. Oh, follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. Timcast.com, become a member. Yeah.